10,000 warriors stood unwavering in the heart of battle. No matter how many fell, their ranks never seemed to thin. This wasn't just an army, it was an illusion of invincibility, a psychological weapon as sharp as their blades. The Persian Immortals weren't just soldiers, they were a masterpiece of military engineering, designed to terrify enemies and dominate empires. But how did a single unit earn such a mythic reputation? What made them the unstoppable force that shaped the ancient world? Today, we're peeling back the layers of legend to reveal the brutal training, cunning tactics, and ironclad discipline that turned these warriors into history's most feared fighting machine. From the sands of Persia to the cliffs of Thermopylae, their story is one of blood, brilliance, and an unbreakable will to conquer. This is the truth behind the elite who never truly died. The concept of a standing army was still foreign to much of the ancient world when Cyrus the Great envisioned something unprecedented, a force always ready for battle, never disbanding after campaigns. While rivals relied on part-time fighters or hastily gathered militia, Persia's ruler saw the future. He needed warriors who ate, slept, and breathed war, a corps so disciplined they could march across continents without hesitation. And so the Immortals were forged, not through myth or divine favor, but through cold, calculated necessity. Every soldier was selected from Persia's strongest clans, tested for endurance, skill, and unshakable loyalty. But the real genius lay in their structure. Lose one man in combat, and another elite recruit stepped seamlessly into his place before the dust settled. This wasn't magic, it was logistics perfected, a revolving door of lethal precision that made their numbers seem eternal. Imagine facing an enemy that never weakened, never faltered, no matter how many blows you struck. That psychological edge alone could unravel entire armies before the first arrow flew. Behind the legend was an empire's relentless ambition, turning raw manpower into the ultimate instrument of control. To join the ranks of the Immortals wasn't simply a matter of picking up a spear. It was an honor reserved for those born into privilege and hardened by relentless trials. While most ancient armies scraped together fighters from farmers and laborers, Persia's elite guard came from noble bloodlines, handpicked from the warrior aristocracy. These weren't just soldiers, they were political symbols, their loyalty as carefully cultivated as their sword arms. The selection process was designed to break the weak. Imagine running for days under the scorching sun, weighted down with armor, only to face precision archery tests with shaking hands and blurred vision. Or sparring against seasoned veterans after nights without sleep, where a single lapse in focus meant failure. Every candidate had to prove not just strength, but absolute mastery of weapons, horsemanship, and unbreakable mental resolve. Yet physical prowess alone wasn't enough. The true test lay in obedience. Unlike the mercenaries or conscripts of rival nations, an Immortal's devotion was non-negotiable. Desertion was unthinkable, not just because it meant death, but because it would tarnish their family's name for centuries. Their identity was inseparable from the empire's glory. To fail was to betray everything they were born to uphold. This wasn't just training, it was transformation. By the time a recruit earned his place among the 10,000, he wasn't merely a fighter. He was a living weapon, bound by tradition, pride, and an unspoken truth. The empire's survival rested on his shoulders. And that weight forged warriors who didn't just fight, they conquered. While most ancient warriors relied on crude leather or stiff bronze plates, the Immortals moved like shadows in armor that defied expectations. Thousands of overlapping iron scales sewn onto supple fabric gave them the flexibility of a second skin, light enough to sprint in battle yet strong enough to turn aside slashing blows. When sunlight hit their ranks, the effect was hypnotic, a rippling wall of silver that dazzled opponents long enough for death to strike. their weapons were just as carefully engineered. Unlike the unwieldy spears of Greek hoplites, the Persian spear, sharpened at both ends, became a deadly whirlwind in close quarters. But the true masterpiece was their composite bow, crafted from layers of horn, wood, and sinew. With a draw weight surpassing 200 pounds, its arrows punched through shields at 300 paces, raining death long before enemies could close the gap. And then there were the masks, bronze faces frozen in expressions of cold fury, designed not just to protect but to unnerve. In the chaos of battle, these emotionless visages turned each warrior into something inhuman, an unfeeling machine of war. Paired with the eerie silence of their disciplined advance, the effect was psychological warfare at its finest. Yet what truly set them apart was balance. While other armies specialized in brute force or ranged volleys, the Immortals perfected the interplay between instruments of death. A single soldier could loose 3 arrows in the time it took a Spartan to raise his shield, then switch seamlessly to spear and dagger when battle lines collided. This wasn't just gear, it was a symphony of violence, each piece amplifying the others in ways no adversary could predict. The Immortals didn't earn their name by chance, they were sculpted into perfection through a training regimen so brutal it bordered on torture. While other armies practiced seasonal warfare, these warriors trained year-round, pushing their bodies and minds past the limits of ordinary soldiers. Under the blistering sun of the Persian plateau, recruits endured hours of drill without rest, their muscles burning as they repeated spear thrusts and archery volleys until every motion became instinct. The Sparabara formation was their signature tactic, a devastating dance of death that few enemies could withstand. First, a wall of archers unleashed a storm of arrows so thick it darkened the sky, forcing foes to raise their shields in panic. Then, in the heartbeat before the enemy could recover, the front ranks would pivot aside, revealing a second line of spear wielders charging straight into the chaos. This wasn't just combat, it was a choreographed massacre perfected through endless repetition. Even meals were transformed into training exercises. Historians describe warriors eating with one hand while holding a weapon in the other, ready to spring into action mid-bite. Every moment, from sunrise drills to nighttime marches, reinforced a single truth: hesitation meant death. Sleep deprivation, forced marches across scorching dunes, and sparring sessions against multiple opponents. Each day was designed to strip away fear and hesitation until only absolute discipline remained. The goal wasn't just skill, it was subconscious reaction. When an immortal raised his bow, he didn't aim. His body knew the shot before his mind registered the target. Spear strikes flowed without thought, footwork adjusted mid-step to uneven terrain, and formation shifts happened in eerie silence. This wasn't just training, it was the systematic erasure of human weakness, replaced with a machine-like precision that made them nearly unstoppable on the battlefield. And yet, the true test came in the mind. Commanders would stage night raids without warning, forcing warriors to fight exhausted and disoriented. Captured enemies were paraded before recruits, only to be executed moments later, a grim lesson in the cost of failure. These men weren't just taught to endure pain, they were conditioned to crave victory so deeply that retreat never crossed their minds. By the time they faced real combat, fear was a foreign concept. The battlefield wasn't chaos to them, it was home. Behind every legendary soldier stood an army of unsung heroes, servants, craftsmen, and supply officers who turned the Immortals from formidable fighters into an unstoppable war machine. While other ancient forces wasted time foraging or repairing gear, Persia's elite guard moved like clockwork, thanks to a logistical system centuries ahead of its time. Each of the 10,000 had his own personal attendant, a non-combatant responsible for keeping weapons razor-sharp, armor gleaming, and bellies full. Imagine the psychological edge of facing warriors who never missed a meal, never fought with dull blades, and never lacked fresh arrows even in the harshest terrain. The secret to their relentless pace lay in the camel trains that shadowed their every move. While Greek hoplites struggled under the weight of their own gear, the Immortals traveled light, with pack animals carrying everything from spare spears to medicinal herbs. These mobile armories allowed them to cover staggering distances 30 miles a day over rocky highlands or scorching deserts, outpacing rivals who assumed geography would slow them down. At night, silk tents erected in minutes shielded them from sandstorms or freezing winds, ensuring they woke battle ready while enemies shivered in the open. But the real genius was their decentralized supply chain. Instead of relying on a single vulnerable baggage train, provisions were dispersed across hundreds of camels and mules. Lose one to an ambush and 99 others kept the army fed. Regional governors along Persia's royal road, the ancient world's first superhighway, had standing orders to stockpile grain, fresh horses, and even replacement troops. This wasn't just an army, it was a self-replenishing force, engineered to operate indefinitely thousands of miles from home. While adversaries like the Spartans prided themselves on enduring hardship, the Immortals weaponized comfort. Hot meals before battle, clean water from hidden desert wells, and even on-the-go repairs for damaged gear meant they entered every fight at peak efficiency. Their enemies often fought exhausted and half-starved, bewildered by warriors who seemed untouched by the ravages of war. This invisible infrastructure, the silent pulse of servants and supply lines, was the true source of their immortality. Long before steel met flesh, the battle was already won not with weapons, but with whispers of the impossible. Picture an enemy force waiting on the dusty plains, gripping their spears as a distant glint of silver appears on the horizon. No war cries, no chaotic charge, just 10,000 faceless warriors moving as one, their polished masks catching the sun like a river of frozen screams. This wasn't just an army, it was theater, and the script was terror. Persian commanders understood something revolutionary. Fear could shatter armies faster than any blade. The Immortals' reputation as undying wasn't just propaganda, it was meticulously staged. Their ranks never visibly thinned because fallen soldiers were replaced instantly, their identical armor and masked faces creating the illusion of warriors risen from the dead. Imagine watching an enemy you just cut down reappear moments later, unharmed. No wonder Greek historians wrote of adversaries fleeing before the first volley, convinced they fought ghosts rather than men. Silence was their deadliest weapon. While other ancient armies relied on deafening battle chants, the Immortals advanced in near-total quiet, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of boots and the faint creak of bowstrings. This disciplined hush amplified every footstep into a psychological hammer blow, turning their approach into a suffocating countdown to doom. Even their arrows struck with eerie coordination, thousands released at once, creating a single, thunderous snap before the sky went black. But the true masterstroke was their uniformity. Every shield polished to mirror brightness, every spear tip aligned at the exact same angle. This wasn't just discipline, it was visual hypnosis. Opponents facing this inhuman wall of precision often hesitated, their instincts screaming that such perfection couldn't belong to mortal men. And hesitation, as any immortal knew, was the first domino in the collapse of an army. By the time Xerxes' forces reached Thermopylae, their legend had raced ahead like a brushfire. Spartan scouts reported soldiers muttering about an endless enemy that bled but did not fall. That reputation alone had the rallying time of Greek city-states as panic spread faster than Persian arrows. In the end, the Immortals' greatest strength wasn't their swords or their stamina, it was the stories men told about them in the dark. And stories, as history shows, conquer minds long before armies conquer lands. Centuries before modern generals dreamt of blitzkrieg or shock and awe, the Immortals were rewriting the rules of war with tactics that blurred the line between genius and brutality. Their strength wasn't just in numbers or skill, it was in their ability to think 3 moves ahead while enemies still fumbled with their first. Picture a battle like Opis, where Babylon's defenders watched in horror as the Persian vanguard suddenly broke ranks, fleeing in apparent panic. What seemed like victory turned to carnage as those retreating troops dissolved into planned chaos, luring overconfident foes into killing zones where waiting archers turned the sky black with arrows. This wasn't disorder, it was a predator feigning injury to draw prey into the open. The real innovation lay in their fluidity between combat styles. While Greek phalanxes or Egyptian chariots relied on rigid formations, the Immortals operated like a single organism, archers suppressing enemy charges with pinpoint volleys, then parting like curtains to unleash armored spearmen. Cavalry didn't just flank, they harried and herded, steering adversaries into terrain where their strengths became liabilities. Even their infamous siege tactics showed ruthless adaptability. When faced with Babylon's towering walls, Persian engineers diverted the Euphrates itself, leaving defenders stranded like fish in a drained pond. No 2 battles unfolded the same way because their playbook wasn't memorized. It was improvised in real time based on an almost scientific study of their enemies' weaknesses. But perhaps their most overlooked advantage was psychological warfare long before the clash of steel. Scouts disguised as merchants mapped enemy camps, spreading rumors of the Immortals' invincibility. Diplomats whispered to rival generals about the futility of resistance, offering pardons to those who surrendered and gruesome examples for those who didn't. By the time armies met on the battlefield, many opponents were already half defeated, their will eroded by carefully crafted terror. This wasn't just fighting, it was a masterclass in manipulating human nature, proving that the deadliest weapon in their arsenal wasn't the bow or spear, but the enemy's own fear. And when diplomacy failed, their adaptability turned even setbacks into victories. In the arid mountains of Scythia, where hit-and-run horsemen refused open battle, the Immortals shed their heavy armor, adopting guerrilla tactics so effectively that they outraided the raiders. They learned to fight like their enemies, then surpassed them at their own game. Every defeat became data, every opponent a lesson. That relentless evolution, more than any single tactic, made them the apex predators of the ancient world. The clash at Thermopylae wasn't just a battle, it was a collision of 2 philosophies of war. On one side stood 300 Spartans, warriors bred for single combat and brute strength. On the other, the Persian Immortals, a machine engineered for precision and psychological dominance. When Xerxes hurled wave after wave of troops at Leonidas's phalanx, only to see them shattered against the Spartan wall of shields, he turned to his ultimate weapon. Contrary to popular legend, the Immortals didn't merely march through the secret goat path, they adapted. Greek traitors guided them, yes, but it was their training in silent night maneuvers that allowed 10,000 men to scale cliffs without raising an alarm. By dawn, they emerged behind the Greek lines not as a disorganized mob but in flawless formation. The Spartans, caught between hammer and anvil, fought like demons, but even heroes can't defy geometry. The Immortals didn't win with heroics, they won by refusing to play their enemy's game. Yet their greatest test came years later at Plataea, where the Greeks finally rallied a united army. Here, the myth of Persian invincibility cracked, but not without revealing the Immortals' terrifying resilience. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, they formed a shield wall that held against charging hoplites for hours, their overlapping armor deflecting blows that would have felled lesser troops. When their lines finally broke, it wasn't from lack of skill. It was the fatal flaw of all elite forces. No amount of training could compensate for the hubris of their commanders, who'd underestimated Greek cohesion. The true lesson of these battles wasn't about strength versus strength, it was about systems. The Spartans represented individual excellence pushed to its limits. The Immortals embodied something far more modern, a military where every soldier was an interchangeable part of a greater mechanism. Their defeats didn't come from being outmatched, they came from facing enemies who learned, adapted, and eventually turned Persia's own tactics against them. At Thermopylae, they exploited terrain. At Plataea, the Greeks exploited arrogance, and in that shift lies the irony. History's most disciplined force was ultimately undone not by weakness, but by the one thing their training couldn't account for, the unpredictability of human desperation. The true power of the Immortals didn't just lie in their weapons or training. It came from a command structure so finely tuned, every soldier moved like a single nerve in a vast, lethal body. Picture a pyramid of loyalty where each level knew its exact role, from the lowliest spearman to the Hazaropotes, the battle-hardened commander who led 1,000. Unlike the fractious Greek city-states or the tribal warlords of Mesopotamia, the Persian system eliminated chaos with ruthless efficiency. Orders didn't trickle down through whispers, they were executed with machine-like precision because hesitation wasn't just discouraged, it was unthinkable. What set this hierarchy apart was its brutal meritocracy. A peasant could never rise to command, but within the warrior nobility, talent mattered. Prove your worth in battle, and you might find yourself gifted with fertile lands or a royal audience. Fail and the shame would outlive you. This carrot-and-stick approach forged a leadership class hungry for glory but disciplined enough to earn it without reckless gambles. The system rewarded calculated aggression like a swordsmith tempering a blade. It prized both sharpness and control. Yet the secret glue holding it all together was Cyrus the Great's revolutionary leadership style. While other kings ruled from gilded palaces, he fought shoulder to shoulder with his elites, sharing their rations and battle scars. That intimacy bred fanatical devotion. When a Hazaropotes shouted an order, his troops knew it carried the weight of imperial authority, but also the unspoken promise that their ruler would demand nothing he hadn't endured himself. This wasn't just hierarchy, it was harmony. Decuri leaders coordinated squads of 10 like fingers on a hand, while senior commanders orchestrated grand maneuvers with the precision of master composers. When Persian forces encircled enemies at Marathon or outflanked rebels along the Nile, it wasn't blind luck. It was the result of a structure where every man knew his role, trusted his brothers, and moved as one. In an age when most armies collapsed into mobs mid-battle, the Immortals operated with a cohesion that felt almost supernatural, and that, more than any myth of immortality, was what made them unstoppable. What made a Persian immortal fight with unwavering certainty even when outnumbered? The answer lies not in their armor, but in their unshakable belief that the gods marched beside them. While other ancient warriors fought for land or loot, these elite soldiers saw themselves as instruments of divine will, a conviction that turned every battle into a holy crusade. At dawn before combat, columns of smoke would rise from their camps as Zoroastrian priests tended sacred fires, chanting hymns to Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom and Light. Soldiers anointed their blades with consecrated oil, believing each strike carried the force of cosmic justice against the lie, the Zoroastrian concept of chaos and deceit. This wasn't mere ritual, it was psychological alchemy, transforming mortal men into fearless avengers of order. Their faith manifested in startling ways on the battlefield. Unlike Greek hoplites who prized individual glory, the Immortals fought as a collective embodiment of righteousness. Surviving accounts describe their eerie discipline under fire. No panic when formations broke, no looting mid-battle, just methodical violence infused with religious fervor. To retreat wasn't just cowardice, it was blasphemy against the divine covenant that promised victory to the faithful. Persian artists captured this sacred aura in stunning detail. The walls of Persepolis still bear their images, endless rows of immaculate warriors frozen in stone, their spears upright like bristling forests. These weren't just decorations, they were propaganda carved in granite, reinforcing the idea that the empire's military elite stood with one foot in the mortal world and the other in the divine. Even their name, Anushya, meaning companions or followers, hinted at their role as attendants to a higher purpose. Yet perhaps their greatest spiritual weapon was the promise of legacy. Zoroastrianism taught that heroic deeds echoed eternally, and no Persian child grew up without hearing tales of the 10,000. This cultural myth-making ensured that every immortal fought not just for his life, but for immortality in song and story, a motivation far more potent than gold. When you believe history itself watches your every move, fear loses its grip, and that, more than any armor or arrow, was the secret fire that forged their unconquerable spirit. The glittering ranks of the Immortals seem like an exclusively masculine world until you peer past the polished masks and spot the shadows moving between tents. Persian warfare wasn't just the domain of men. While most records focus on the 10,000 elite soldiers, whispers from clay tablets and temple reliefs suggest women played far more than ceremonial roles. Take Artemisia, the Carian queen who commanded Xerxes' warships at Salamis, outmaneuvering Greek admirals with tactics so bold the king reportedly declared, "My men have become women and my women men." If a woman could lead entire fleets, why not stand among the empire's finest? Archaeology offers tantalizing clues. A recently unearthed burial near Persepolis held the skeleton of a noblewoman interred with a scaled corselet identical to immortal armor, her hands still clasping a recurved bow. Nearby tablets describe Tanuhian elite warrior maidens tasked with guarding royal women but trained to fight like their male counterparts. These weren't just bodyguards, they drilled with the same lethal precision. Their existence hinted at in Herodotus' accounts of Persian queens leading rebellions when kings fell in battle. Yet the debate rages on. Some scholars dismiss these finds as outliers, arguing that Zoroastrian traditions emphasized gender-segregated roles. But scrolls from Babylon's archives tell another story. Lists of rations distributed to women of the shield accompanying Persian regiments. Whether these were combatants or support staff remains contested, but one thing is clear: Persian military logistics made no distinction when it came to feeding skilled hands, whether they wielded needles or daggers. The truth likely lies in the gray zones of ancient warfare. While women may not have marched in the Immortals' primary ranks, their influence pulsed through the empire's war machine. From the priestesses who blessed departing troops to the scribes who encrypted battlefield messages, Persia's conquests depended on more than just spear wielders. Perhaps the real revisionism isn't in suggesting their presence, but in pretending they were ever absent from history's deadliest stages. What emerges isn't a simple tale of inclusion or exclusion, but a complex tapestry where necessity often overrode tradition. When empires clashed, talent frequently trumped gender, and Persia, with its relentless pragmatism, knew better than to waste any weapon at its disposal. History remembers elite warriors not just for their skill, but for how they measured against their greatest rivals. Picture the clash of doctrines: Sparta's 300 muscles straining behind bronze shields, Alexander's companions thundering across the plains on armored horses, and the Persian Immortals, a silver tide of calculated violence. Each represented the pinnacle of their civilization's art of war, but only one was engineered to adapt to any battlefield. Where the Spartan hoplite excelled in brute force cohesion, his rigid phalanx was a weapon with a single setting: crush or be crushed. The Immortals, by contrast, fought like a blade with multiple edges. Against the Greeks' wall of shields, they'd soften defenses with arrow storms before switching to spear thrusts, a flexibility Spartan drill masters bound by tradition rarely matched. Thermopylae's narrow pass neutralized Persia's numbers, but on open ground, Spartan discipline often shattered against the Immortals' combined arms tactics. Alexander's companions present another fascinating contrast. These Macedonian horsemen were the scalpel to Persia's Swiss army knife, lightning strikes by the nobility, their lances decisive but dependent on cavalry support. The Immortals, however, needed no such backup. A single unit could hold a line, skirmish at range, or flank like light infantry, making them less vulnerable when battles deviated from plan. Yet the companions had one critical advantage. Their leader fought alongside them, a weakness Persia's hierarchical command structure couldn't compensate for when facing Alexander's charisma in the field. Even Egypt's Medjay or Assyria's royal guards paled in logistical comparison. These were formidable fighters, but none maintained the Immortals near constant readiness or self-replenishing ranks. What truly set Persia's elite apart wasn't just skill, it was sustainability. They could campaign for years across deserts, mountains, and rivers while rivals faltered without supply lines. Yet no force was invincible. The Immortals struggled against unconventional foes like Scythian horse archers, whose hit-and-run tactics exploited their reliance on orderly engagements. And unlike Sparta's citizen soldiers or Alexander's multi-ethnic core, their aristocratic exclusivity limited their ability to replace losses after catastrophic defeats. The lesson, versatility, made them history's most adaptable elite, but even the sharpest blade dulls when overextended. In the end, comparing these units is less about declaring a winner and more about understanding warfare's evolution. The Spartans symbolized unwavering resilience, the companions embodied audacious leadership, but the Immortals, they were warfare's first true system, a preview of the modern soldier, where training, logistics, and psychology matter as much as raw courage. Siege warfare mastery, even the mightiest walls crumbled before the Immortals' blend of cunning and brute force. While other armies wasted lives in futile frontal assaults, Persia's elite turned siegecraft into an art form, part engineering, part chess match. Take Babylon, the legendary city whose towering defenses mocked invaders for centuries. When Cyrus the Great set his sights on it, conventional tactics would have meant months of starvation or a bloodbath at the gates. Instead, his Immortals redefined the battlefield. Under cover of night, teams of engineers diverted the Euphrates River itself, lowering the water level just enough for shock troops to wade beneath the city's submerged gates. Imagine Babylonian sentries standing guard atop walls they believed impregnable, never suspecting the real threat was rising silently through the sewers below. By dawn, the inner city burned, not from siege engines but from a play so audacious it became legend. This wasn't just victory, it was a masterclass in reimagining the impossible. But waterworks were just one trick in their arsenal. Faced with stone fortresses like Sardis, the Immortals deployed mobile siege towers, multi-story behemoths wheeled into position under a hail of covering arrows. Each level housed archers picking off defenders while armored crews below battered the walls with rams. Yet their deadliest tools were the sappers, miners who tunneled beneath foundations to collapse entire sections of wall without wasting a single soldier. The genius lay in their flexibility. No two sieges unfolded the same way. Against the Scythians' nomadic strongholds, they burned grasslands to smoke out foes. In Egypt, they exploited dynastic rivalries, turning local traitors into unwitting keys to the kingdom. Every strategy hinged on understanding an enemy's weakest point, not just in stone but in morale. Why starve a city into surrender when you could bribe its gatekeepers or spread whispers of desertion? What set them apart wasn't just their tools but their patience. While rivals like the Assyrians relied on terror alone, the Immortals combined it with precision. A week of feigned retreats might lure defenders into complacency before the real strike came. Or they'd build visible siegeworks only to attack where no one expected. In the end, their greatest weapon wasn't the battering ram or the tunnel. It was the ability to make walls irrelevant long before they fell. The myth of invincibility finally shattered on the dusty plains of Gaugamela, where the setting sun seemed to symbolize an empire's decline. Alexander the Great didn't just defeat the Immortals, he exposed the flaw lurking beneath their polished armor. For centuries, their strength had been adaptability, but against the Macedonian phalanx's bristling wall of 18-foot spears, they fought like relics of a fading era. The Sarissas didn't merely kill, they neutralized the Immortals' greatest advantage: close quarters versatility, pinning them at a distance where their composite bows and short spears couldn't retaliate. Yet the real failure wasn't weaponry but imagination. Persian commanders, conditioned by decades of predictable adversaries, kept recycling the same playbook, arrow barrages followed by disciplined spear advances. But Alexander refused to play by their rules. His cavalry feigned retreats, luring the Immortals into broken terrain where their formations fractured. The companions then struck like a hammer against the anvil of the phalanx, exploiting gaps that earlier foes had never dared to create. Could they have adapted? Perhaps, if their rigid hierarchy had allowed it. Younger officers reportedly urged tactical innovations like adopting longer spears or decentralized commands. But the weight of tradition stifled change. The same system that once made them unbeatable now left them vulnerable, their obedience morphing into inertia. After Gaugamela, survivors retreated not just from a battlefield but from their own legend. The empire's collapse wasn't just military, it was psychological. When the 10,000 finally disbanded, it wasn't due to lack of courage but because the world had outgrown them. Their legacy, though, endures in unexpected ways. Later conquerors, from Rome to the Mongols, would study their logistics and terror tactics. Even in defeat, the Immortals taught a brutal lesson: no force, no matter how elite, survives without evolution. The sands of Mesopotamia buried their bodies, but their shadow lingers wherever armies balance discipline with the courage to reinvent. Legacy in modern military strategy. 2,000 years may separate us from the Persian Immortals, but their fingerprints are still smudged across every modern battlefield. While their iron scales and composite bows belong to museums, their revolutionary approach to warfare lives on, reshaping armies from the Roman legions to today's elite special forces. What made them timeless wasn't just their skill, but their blueprint for turning soldiers into a system, one so effective it transcends centuries. Take professionalism. Before the Immortals, most ancient warriors were farmers first, fighters second. Persia flipped that script, creating history's first full-time, career soldiers, a concept so radical, it took Rome another 500 years to fully adopt it. Today, that legacy echoes in every standing army, from the U.S. Marines to China's PLA. The idea that soldiers train year-round, master multiple weapons, and operate as a cohesive unit. That's not modern innovation, it's borrowed directly from Persia's playbook. Then there's logistics, the unglamorous backbone of military dominance. The Immortals' mobile supply trains, decentralized caches, and rapid replacement systems set a standard that still defines modern warfare. When NATO troops in Afghanistan dropped pallets of ammo to remote outposts, or Russia's Wagner Group used disguised merchant convoys to resupply, they were unwittingly channeling Persian ingenuity. Even the Pentagon's just-in-time logistics philosophy, ensuring troops get what they need before they know they need it, mirrors the efficiency of those ancient camel caravans shadowing the 10,000. But perhaps their most enduring lesson is adaptability. The Immortals didn't just follow orders, they thought, switching tactics mid-battle like chess players. That fluidity lives on in today's special forces, where Green Berets or Spetsnaz operatives blend into environments, improvise with local tools, and shift missions on the fly. When U.S. Marines train to fight as riflemen one day and humanitarian aid workers the next, they're embodying the same versatility that let Persia's elites conquer deserts, mountains, and fortified cities without missing a beat. The irony, many of history's great military minds never studied the Immortals directly, yet their principles seeped into strategy through osmosis, Rome copying Persia, Napoleon studying Rome, and modern generals dissecting Napoleon. The thread runs unbroken. Professionalism, logistics, and adaptability aren't just tactics. They're the DNA of winning wars, and that's why, in a world of drones and cyber warfare, we're still learning from shadows cast by 10,000 silver masks. Archaeology rarely gives us clear answers, but when it comes to the Immortals, every shard of pottery and fragment of armor whispers a tantalizing clue. Recent excavations at Persepolis have yielded something extraordinary. A cache of iron-scale armor, still threaded with remnants of its leather backing, lying exactly where a barracks once stood. These aren't just relics, they're puzzle pieces, revealing how Herodotus' descriptions hold up under modern scrutiny. Take the famous endless numbers myth. For years, scholars debated whether the Immortals truly replaced fallen soldiers so seamlessly. Then archaeologists uncovered administrative tablets, tiny clay records noting troop transfers with chilling precision. One reads, from Susa to Sardes, 10 archers, 2 spearmen, 1 horseman to fill the ranks of the unconquerable. This wasn't poetry, it was paperwork. The bureaucracy behind their legend turns out to be just as fascinating as the legend itself. But not all ancient tales survive the trowel's test. Herodotus claimed their robes were dyed scarlet and embroidered with gold, yet the few fabric fragments preserved in desert tombs show only traces of indigo and white. Were the Greeks dazzled by parade armor, or did the historian embellish to impress his Athenian audience? Even their iconic wicker shields leave no physical trace, only Assyrian carvings depicting similar designs, suggesting the Immortals may have adopted older technologies. Perhaps the most startling revelation comes from skeletal analysis. Graves near Marathon hold Persian warriors with horrific injuries, bones fused from poorly healed fractures, spines twisted from years of carrying heavy loads. These weren't invincible demigods, they were men who pushed their bodies past breaking points, then kept marching. Their immortality, it seems, was a triumph of will as much as skill. Yet for every mystery solved, new questions emerge. Why do some armor scales show signs of repairs from distinctly Greek techniques? Did captured smiths work alongside Persian armorers? And what of the clay figurines found in officers' quarters, tiny, masked riders that look eerily like toy soldiers? The deeper we dig, the more human the Immortals become. Not mythical automatons, but a complex mix of discipline, innovation, and sheer desperation to live up to their impossible name. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between the cracked tablets and the campfire stories. What emerges isn't a debunking of Herodotus, but a richer tapestry, one where reality and myth intertwine to create something even more compelling than pure fiction. After all, how many legends leave behind receipts? Hollywood loves a good villain, especially one clad in eerie masks and moving like a silent silver tide. But the Persian Immortals we see on screen often bear little resemblance to the real elite warriors of history. Take 300, where they're reduced to faceless monsters, more orc-like than human, snarling behind grotesque iron faces. It makes for gripping cinema, but it strips away what truly made them terrifying: their discipline, their adaptability, their humanity. The real Immortals didn't need CGI enhancements to unsettle their enemies. their reputation alone could fracture an army's morale before the first arrow flew. That's not to say pop culture always gets it wrong. The Prince of Persia games, for all their fantasy twists, at least capture the essence of Persian martial artistry, fluid swordplay, intricate tactics, and a reverence for the empire's grandeur. Even Assassin's Creed's brief forays into ancient Persia hint at their layered command structure, showing them as more than just cannon fodder. The best portrayals remember this wasn't a mindless horde, it was a machine of war where every cog had purpose. Yet for every glimmer of accuracy, there's a mountain of myth. Video games love to pit them as endless, zombie-like waves, ignoring the meticulous training that made each warrior lethal on his own. Movies exaggerate their numbers while downplaying their intellect, as if strategy wasn't their greatest weapon. The irony: by turning them into fantasy monsters, we dull the real lesson of the Immortals, that history's most feared forces weren't supernatural. They were simply better organized, more disciplined, more adaptive, more ruthless in their pursuit of victory. So why does this misrepresentation matter? Because it shapes how we remember them. When we reduce the Immortals to faceless mooks, we erase their sophistication, the very thing that made them revolutionary. They weren't just enemies, they were innovators, the apex of an empire's military might. And maybe that's the real tragedy of pop culture's take. In painting them as monstrous, we miss the chance to marvel at what they truly were, the deadliest system the ancient world ever built. On the flip side, even flawed portrayals keep their legacy alive. Every time a game lets players don their scaled armor or a film pits them against heroes, it sparks curiosity. Someone might see 300 and wonder, were they really like that? And in that question lies the gateway to history, where the truth, as always, is far more fascinating than fiction. What made the Immortals unstoppable wasn't just their skill with a blade or their polished armor. It was something far more universal, something that still holds power today. Whether leading a team in battle or a boardroom, the principles that drove their success remain startlingly relevant, because at their core, these warriors mastered three timeless pillars of human achievement: unity forged through trust, preparation elevated to obsession, and morale weaponized into psychological dominance. Start with cohesion, the kind that turns individuals into something greater. The Immortals didn't just fight alongside each other, they moved as extensions of a single mind. Modern researchers call this shared mental models, where teams anticipate each other's actions without words. Silicon Valley startups and elite military units chase this same synergy today, but Persia's elites built it through relentless communal rituals. They ate together, trained together, and even slept in mirrored formations, embedding coordination so deep it became instinct. When a CEO invests in team retreats or a coach drills squad chemistry, they're tapping into the same truth: trust isn't soft, it's a tactical advantage. Then there's preparation, not the cursory rehearsals of most organizations, but the kind that borders on fanaticism. While others practiced for predictable scenarios, the Immortals trained for chaos, fighting blindfolded, navigating at night, even sparring while starved or exhausted. The lesson: resilience isn't born in crisis, it's carved in advance through deliberate discomfort. Today's fire drills, stress tests, and hackathons all mimic this philosophy, proving that the best way to survive uncertainty is to court it long before disaster strikes. But their real masterstroke was morale. Not the rah-rah cheerleading of modern motivational posters, but a calculated ecosystem of belief. From the sacred fires lit before battle to the instant replacement of fallen comrades, every detail reinforced one message: you are part of something unbreakable. Contemporary leaders might swap Zoroastrian hymns for mission statements or stock options, but the mechanism is identical. When people believe their work carries transcendent purpose, ordinary effort transforms into extraordinary results. The takeaway isn't about copying ancient tactics verbatim. It's recognizing that the Immortals' edge wasn't technological, it was psychological. They weaponized human nature itself, turning fear into fuel and camaraderie into combat multiplier. 2 millennia later, the playing fields have changed, but the rules haven't. Whether guiding a startup or steering a nation, lasting dominance still belongs to those who understand this truth. The strongest systems aren't built on tools, but on the minds and hearts of those who wield them. For all their legendary discipline, the Immortals left behind a puzzle that still divides historians: how much of their myth was reality, and how much was carefully crafted illusion. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus famously claimed their ranks never dipped below 10,000, with fallen soldiers instantly replaced to maintain an aura of invincibility. Yet scroll through surviving Persian inscriptions, and you'll find no grand monuments boasting of an immortal core. The name itself, Anushya, appears only in foreign accounts, leading some scholars to ask, did these warriors even call themselves by that title, or was it a Greek invention to explain their uncanny resilience? Dig deeper and the contradictions multiply. Babylonian tax records from Cyrus's reign list shipments of grain and weapons to royal guard units, but none bear the poetic labels Greek writers used. Even Persepolis's lavish carvings, which depict endless rows of identical elite soldiers, identify them simply as the king's kinsmen or spear bearers. This raises a provocative possibility. What if the Immortals weren't a formal division at all, but a fluid rotation of the Empire's best troops, their legend amplified by enemies who couldn't fathom their coordination? Then there's the question of their supposed flawless record. While Persian chronicles celebrate victories, they're conspicuously silent on setbacks, yet archaeology tells a subtler story. Mass graves near Marathon contain skeletons in scaled armor, some with Greek spear tips still wedged between their ribs. If no immortal ever fell, why do these bones bear marks of brutal, final defeats? The likelier truth lies in between. They were elite, yes, but not supernatural. Their real power may have been an early form of information warfare, letting rumors of invincibility spread until even minor victories felt like proof of divine favor. Perhaps the most enduring mystery isn't whether they were perfect, but why Persia's own scribes ignored their legend. Was it modesty or something more shrewd? In an empire built on absorbing dozens of cultures, maybe downplaying elite units prevented resentment among conquered peoples. Whatever the answer, one thing's certain: the Immortals' greatest trick wasn't vanishing from battlefields, it was vanishing from their own records, leaving us to piece together truth from fragments and folklore. And that ambiguity, intentional or not, is what keeps their mystique alive centuries later. The battlefield was a tempest of clashing steel and war cries, yet amid the chaos, the Immortals moved with eerie synchronicity, as if bound by invisible threads. Their secret, a communication network so sophisticated, it would make modern generals nod in respect. While other ancient armies relied on shouted orders and runners, Persia's elite waged war in near silence, their commands flowing through encrypted scrolls, flickering mirrors, and even bird calls tailored to cut through the din of combat. Take their signaling system: polished bronze discs mounted on spears, flashing prearranged codes across miles in seconds. One flick meant flank left, two meant feign retreat, and a rapid series could relay entire battle plans without a single word. These weren't just tools, they were force multipliers, allowing 10,000 warriors to pivot as one, even when dust clouds blinded them to their commanders' positions. Then there were the hush runners, young recruits trained to sprint messages between units with lips sealed. Unlike Greek heralds who bellowed orders openly, these couriers carried coded clay tablets scratched with symbols decipherable only to officers. Break one open, and you'd find nonsense verses or merchant ledgers unless you knew to hold it over steam. revealing hidden battle maps in ink made from lotus extract. Even captured messages spilled no secrets, but the real genius lay in their adaptability. In dense forests, they switched to whistle codes mimicking local bird songs. During night raids, oil-soaked rags tied to arrows arced predetermined trajectories to guide attacks. And when absolute stealth was vital, they used foot talk, a language of toe taps and heel scrapes against stone, audible only to those trained to listen. This wasn't just communication, it was cognitive warfare. Opponents, accustomed to the roar of Greek horns or Assyrian drums, found the Immortals' silence unnerving. How do you counter an enemy that strikes without warning, shifts tactics without shouts, and vanishes without a trace? By the time rivals decoded one method, Persia's elites had already invented 3 more. Their greatest weapon wasn't just what they said, but how effortlessly they said nothing at all. Behind the shimmering wall of masks and spears, individual stories flicker like candlelight, fragile, human, yet burning bright against time's relentless tide. Take Ardashir, the immortal who defied the sea itself to shield his king. When Greek fire engulfed Xerxes' flagship at Salamis, panicked oarsmen dove into the waves, but this warrior clung to duty. With a deck collapsing under him, he reportedly hauled his wounded ruler through smoke and floating debris, using his own scaled armor as a flotation device. Persian chronicles claim he swam for hours, one arm gripping Xerxes' robe, the other fending off enemy arrows with nothing but a dagger clenched between his teeth. What kind of loyalty drives a man to fight the ocean itself? Then there's Roshanak, her name etched faintly on a recovered officer's seal near Babylon. Most historians dismissed it as a scribe's error until excavations revealed her burial site. A woman interred with a commander's golden gorget and a stylized leopard emblem reserved for high-ranking tacticians. Scroll fragments describe her leading a nighttime counterattack against Scythian raiders, using their own hit-and-run tactics against them. Like a sandstorm that strikes back, one account marvels. Was she an exception or proof that Persia's meritocracy occasionally bent its own rigid rules? These aren't just footnotes, they're fractures in the myth, revealing the flesh and blood souls beneath the legend. Ardashir's tale hints at the unspoken bonds between the elite and their king, a reciprocity sharper than any spear. Roshanak's legacy challenges our assumptions about gender in ancient warfare, suggesting that even the most hierarchical systems left cracks for brilliance to shine through. Perhaps the most poignant discovery comes from a charred letter in Persepolis ruins. Written by an immortal named Vahishta to his newborn son, it contains no boasts of battle, just a father's plea. May you serve with honor, but never love war more than the laughter of children. In that fragile scrap of clay, we glimpse the duality of these warriors, architects of empires who still whispered lullabies, conquerors who ached for home. Their humanity, not their armor, is what makes them immortal. For all their legendary discipline on the battlefield, even the immortals couldn't fight on an empty stomach, and their diet was as meticulously engineered as their armor. While other ancient armies scavenged or starved, Persia's elite carried precise rations designed to fuel marathon marches and relentless combat. Archaeological digs near old Persian campsites reveal something surprising. These weren't just warriors gulping down whatever they could find. Their meals were calculated, packed with proteins and carbs to sustain superhuman stamina. Take their staple, a dense barley cake laced with crushed dates and sesame oil. Found charred in the ruins of a marching camp near Thermopylae, these portable bricks of energy could last weeks without spoiling. Mixed with fermented mare's milk, a tangy, probiotic-rich drink still consumed by Mongolian nomads today, they became a powerhouse of endurance nutrition. Modern athletes might recognize it as an ancient version of carb loading, with the fermented milk offering gut health benefits science is only now rediscovering. But the real secret weapon, figs, not just any fruit but sun-dried, pressed into compact discs that could be stored for months. Persian physicians believed figs purified the blood, and they weren't wrong. Packed with potassium and quick-digesting sugars, they prevented cramping during long desert treks. Pair that with strips of air-dried goat meat, and you've got a protein combo that could keep a soldier fighting for days without fresh supplies. What's fascinating is how their rations doubled as tactical tools. Unlike Greek hoplites burdened by heavy grain sacks, the Immortals traveled light. Their camel trains carried lightweight, nutrient-dense foods that required no cooking, meaning no smoke to betray their position. Even their bronze ration cups doubled as helmets in a pinch, proving every ounce of their gear served multiple purposes. To truly grasp their efficiency, we recreated a day's worth of Immortal rations. The barley cakes, chewy and bland but startlingly effective for sustained energy. The fermented mare's milk, an acquired taste, but after one sip you understand why it was called the drink that wards off fatigue. And those fig discs, still delicious 2 millennia later. This wasn't just food, it was edible logistics, another reason these warriors could outmarch, outfight, and outlast anyone foolish enough to stand in their way. Modern science reveals what ancient enemies could only guess. The Immortals' dominance wasn't just skill or discipline, but a physiological advantage carved into their very bodies. Biomechanics researchers analyzing Persian training techniques have uncovered something startling. Their relentless drills didn't just build strength, they rewired muscle memory for maximum efficiency. Motion capture studies of their documented spear thrusts show a kinetic chain so refined, each movement flowed into the next with near-perfect energy transfer. Unlike Greek hoplites who relied on brute upper body force, the Immortals' techniques engaged hips and core like modern athletes, allowing them to fight longer without exhaustion. Their armor played an equally ingenious role. While Hollywood depicts ancient warriors weighed down by clunky bronze, the Immortals scaled corset. It was a marvel of ergonomic design. Engineers using 3D scans of recovered armor found the iron plates distributed weight across the shoulders and torso like a high-end hiking backpack, reducing strain by up to 40% compared to Greek cuirasses. Even their infamous masks, once thought purely ceremonial, are now believed to have stabilized neck muscles during archery, preventing the whiplash fatigue that plagued other ancient archers. Nutritional anthropology adds another layer to the puzzle. Bone analysis from Persian burial sites shows elevated levels of calcium and iron, undeniable proof of a diet engineered for endurance. Their rations weren't just calories, they were precision fuel. Modern triathletes consuming equivalent protein-to-carb ratios show similar stamina spikes, validating what ancient accounts claimed. These warriors could march 50 miles in full gear and still fight at peak capacity. Perhaps most fascinating is what military physiologists call the adaptation gap. While most ancient soldiers trained seasonally, the Immortals' year-round conditioning triggered permanent changes in muscle fibers and oxygen uptake. Their bodies became specialists in sustained stress, much like Tour de France cyclists today. This wasn't mere toughness, it was biological evolution accelerated by relentless discipline. Yet the ultimate testament to their sophistication lies in what they didn't carry. Archaeologists note the absence of heavy thigh or arm armor found in other contemporary armies. Every ounce saved meant more stamina for combat's critical moments, a lesson modern special forces now emulate by ditching unnecessary gear. The Immortals didn't just master war, they mastered the human body itself, turning physiological limits into mere suggestions. The sands of time have buried empires, but some legends refuse to stay silent. The Persian Immortals weren't merely warriors, they redefined what an army could be, blending meticulous organization with psychological dominance in ways that still echo through modern warfare. Their story isn't just about battles fought, it's about an idea so powerful it outlived its creators. What made them unforgettable wasn't their weapons or even their undefeated reputation, it was their system. A blueprint so effective, empires for centuries would unknowingly copy its principles. The Romans perfected standing armies, but Persia pioneered them. Napoleon mastered logistics, yet the Immortals' camel trains and decentralized supply chains did it first. Even today's special forces, with their emphasis on adaptability and mental resilience, walk paths these ancient warriors carved. But here's the twist: their greatest weakness became their lasting lesson. The very discipline that made them unstoppable also made them slow to evolve when faced with an innovator like Alexander. That tension between tradition and adaptation still defines military strategy. Modern commanders study their triumphs, but also their failures, because perfection isn't eternal. Their legacy lingers in unexpected places. Next time you see a sports team drill with robotic precision, or a CEO obsess over supply chains, remember, you're witnessing echoes of a 500-year-old philosophy. The Immortals proved that true dominance isn't about brute force. It's about the relentless pursuit of excellence in every detail, from the rations in a soldier's pack to the glint of sunlight on 1,000 polished masks. So were they truly immortal, not in flesh but in influence. They remind us that the past isn't just a graveyard of forgotten ideas, it's a toolbox, and sometimes the most cutting-edge solutions are waiting to be rediscovered in the dust of history. If uncovering these hidden stories excites you, don't forget to like and subscribe. The ancient world still has secrets to spill, and we're just getting